Live from the world headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, this is the news with Rick Sanchez.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez, and we want to welcome all of you who are watching us from all over the world, including those of you who are using your mobile devices with the portable TV app. And we're going to begin today with the possibility of a war. We're not talking about a trade war, and we're not talking about a Cold War. What we're talking about is a real war between the United States and China. Now, under most circumstances, we would not dare to make this suggestion because, well, it would seem almost hyperbolic, right? Why then are we leading our newscast today with the suggestion of this potential scenario? Well, because two world leaders are coming out and saying that this is what they think could happen. And these are leaders who know the region, the Asian Pacific. Both men are Australian, and both have held the position of Prime Minister of Australia. First, there's the former Prime Minister, who happens to also be a China scholar. His name is Kevin Rudd. You see him there. He has just penned an editorial in the Foreign Affairs Journal where he says that the risk of an armed conflict between the United States and China in the next 3 months is especially high. Then, as you might expect, Australia's current Prime Minister, there he is, Scott Morrison. He was asked to comment on his predecessor's statement, and surprisingly, he basically agreed. Morrison said that the hot war between the United States and China was, quote, previously inconceivable and not considered even possible or likely, but not anymore. Two Australian prime ministers, one a former, the other a present, sounding an alarm they seem to want the whole world to hear. So the question is, should we be heeding the warning, or should we simply see it as an alarmist view? We're going to answer that question here on the News with Rick Sanchez, where we believe it's time to do news again. Okay, here we go. The list of the questions we think you'll be asking tomorrow after watching this newscast today. Are Australia's concerns over a war between the U.S. and China justified? What happened to American jobs in July, and how big will that announcement be? What really caused the devastation in Beirut, and what's an explosives expert have to say about this? We're going to ask him. For almost a full year now, we here on this newscast have watched as relations between the United States and China have deteriorated. There have been arrests, there have been sanctions, there have been tariffs, there have been military exercises, and interactions in open waters between military. And that was all before the COVID-19 pandemic that has one side now accusing the other of purposely making the world sick to gain an economic advantage. Wow. We begin our newscast today with RT correspondent John Huddy.
Hot war, cold war, cyber war, whatever war, Aussie Prime Minister Scott Morrison said in a recent interview with CBS News that a war between the U.S. and China could break out if cooler diplomatic heads don't prevail. He was responding to a recent article written by his predecessor, Kevin Rudd, who warned of a potential hot war, that is, an armed conflict between the U.S. and China in the run-up to the U.S. presidential elections in November.
Well, our defence update expresses it differently and certainly not as dramatically as Kevin has. But in our own defence update, we've acknowledged that what was previously inconceivable and not considered even possible or likely in terms of those types of outcomes is not considered in those contexts anymore.
Australia has had its own issues with China lately. China has criticized Australia's recent handling of the coronavirus pandemic and Morrison's comments about prioritizing an Indo-Pacific alliance to balance, quote, China's economic coercion, after Beijing banned Australian barley and some beef imports following Canberra's call for an investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Morrison also took some recent heat for his view about TikTok being, as he said, a line that connects right back to China. Still, Australia and China are significant trade partners. China is the single biggest foreign owner of Australian water, with Chinese investors now surpassing the U.S. in ownership of Australian H2O. And Australian imports hit $56.6 billion U.S. dollars in 2019. And during the past decade, Australian dairy imports to mainland China have grown more than fourfold, according to recent reports. Prime Minister Morrison has called on China to enhance regional and global stability rather than, he says, focusing on a narrow national or aspirational interest, while also urging the U.S. and Trump administration to resolve its own issues with China on trade, security, and international law. For the news with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy.
Good stuff, John. Thanks for breaking that down for us. Let's bring in some expert guests who can help us decipher this. John Sitilides is a geopolitical analyst with Trilogy Advisors, and of course, George Galloway, as you've come to know, is our former British MP who oftentimes talks about these specific issues in this part of the world. Hey, John, I'm going to start with you. How would you describe what not one, but two prime ministers of Australia are declaring?
Well, first, let me begin, Rick, by just noting that I believe that we have entered the phase of Cold War II. This is pretty much the case now after China's actions over the last 6 months, beginning with the spread of COVID. As to the Australian prime ministers, I had a chance to read the Foreign Affairs article this morning, and I don't think there's anything that's really all that startling about either prime minister's comments that a war between China and the U.S. is no longer inconceivable, given the very accelerated militarization of the South China Sea by China, amphibious exercises to potentially invade Taiwan, the suppression of freedom and autonomy in Hong Kong, and attacks along the China-India border over 2,000 miles long. So we see a pattern of Chinese belligerence while the world is distracted by COVID and by economic devastation. But I don't believe there's any such thing as a 3-month window where war is more likely or anything like that. And I believe that there will be much cooler heads prevailing in both Washington and Beijing about any deliberate steps towards war. But the danger is, given what has been happening under Chinese belligerence in Asia and beyond, the potential for a miscalculation could lead to an escalation that no one wants to see occur.
Hey, John, just to be clear, at the very beginning, I heard you mention COVID-19. Are you asserting, as President Trump does, that the Chinese did COVID-19 on purpose?
No, I'm not, and I actually don't believe that's what the White House has been stating. What we do see is either immense gross incompetence on the part of the Chinese Communist Party, or potentially, and I think this is really where the mistrust has emerged in the White House between Washington and Beijing, that the Chinese Communist Party leadership from Xi Jinping on down knew that this was far more dangerous. It was no longer containable in Wuhan, and yet Beijing continued to impress upon the International Civil Aviation Organization to allow for international flights from Wuhan to the United States, to Europe, and worldwide, while it shut down domestic travel from Wuhan to Beijing, Shanghai, and other major Chinese cities.
Okay, good. I just wanted to get a clarification on that. I had to do the re-ask. Let's go to George Galloway. George, I imagine you might disagree with what Mr. Sitilides has to say.
Well, that was the world as viewed through the looking glass, where words mean exactly what you decide that they mean. And in many cases, those statements were the precise opposite of the truth. It's not China that's got warships in the South American Sea. It's America that's got warships in the South China Sea. It's not China that's got nuclear-armed aeroplanes off the coast of China. It's the other way around. The belligerence is all on the other side than has just been asserted. But we both agree on this, that there is nothing all that remarkable about what two Australian prime ministers have said, because trade wars, cyber wars, propaganda wars, Cold Wars oftentimes pave the way to hot war. And if that hot war breaks out, then of course, we're in, if you'll forgive the pun, completely uncharted waters. Will it be a conventional war? Will it escalate to short-range nuclear missiles? Will it escalate to intercontinental ballistic missiles, in which case you and I will never talk again, Rick, because the world will be at an end. The insouciance with which some people approach these existential questions, ending of Earth and the human race questions, is quite frankly staggering. Now, Wag the Dog was not just a movie. Bill Clinton, in my lifetime, killed one of my friends, the finest woman painter in the Arab world, Leila Al-Atta, as a Wag the Dog maneuver to distract attention from the failings of his administration. And Donald Trump has more than Bill Clinton's problems right now, just a few months out from the presidential election.
You gentlemen gave us two contrasting points of view on an issue that we wanted to take a look at, and we were certainly glad that we had you both here to take us through it. John Sitilides, John Galloway, thank you, sirs, for joining us for that discussion. Appreciate it. In a day of alarming reports, let me add another story that we've been working on for you. According to two peer-reviewed studies, one from the UK and the other from Chile, deforestation and the rampant destruction of natural resources fueled by human greed will cause more harm than we can even begin to imagine. RT's Alex Mihailovich has been looking into this.
From greenhouse gases to an insatiable hunger for resources. According to a theoretical study featured in Natural Science Reports, human behavior has put our planet on the fast track to a catastrophic collapse. The paper uses a quantitative analysis of the sustainability of current world population growth in relation to the parallel deforestation process, adopting a statistical point of view. In other words, our growing population is calculated alongside human resource consumption rates to evaluate what our chances are of avoiding self-destruction. The news isn't good. When all is said and done, the study shows that our civilization has a very low probability of avoiding a collapse, the most optimistic estimate standing at 10%. The report points to the density of the world's forests, or lack thereof, as being one of the best measures of predicting what the future holds. The study's authors, Mauro Bologna and Gerardo Aquino, note that if the current rate of deforestation is sustained, all the Earth's forests will disappear within 100 to 200 years. However, that doesn't mean the human population would last that long. Life-supporting systems would disappear long before the last tree died. This includes carbon storage, oxygen production, soil conservation, and water cycle regulation. According to the paper, the progressive degradation of the environment due to deforestation would heavily affect human society, and consequently, the human collapse would start much earlier. The report says this means the next 20 to 40 years. Before the rise of human civilization, our planet was covered in 37 million square miles of forest. In our relatively brief time here, people have managed to bring that number down to 25 million square miles. That's approximately 1/3 of all forests gone. When it comes to deforestation, the Amazon is indicative of what is happening on a global scale. The Amazon jungle, which some call the lungs of the planet, has decreased in size by nearly 20% in the past 50 years. Some scientists believe that if another 5% is destroyed, the entire rainforest will dry out and turn into a savanna. Man-made fires have raged in the Amazon over the past year, helping close in on that tipping point. If that were to happen, it would not only be devastating to the region, but the entire planet, as explained by actor and vice chair of Conservation International, Harrison Ford, at the United Nations headquarters in New York last September.
When a room in your house is on fire, you don't say there's a fire in a room in my house, you say my house is on fire. And we only have one house.
Fires in the Amazon have increased by 28% since last year. Many blame Brazil's right-wing president, Jair Bolsonaro, who made calls to clear land in Brazil's Amazon to drive economic development. The scientists behind the study say the only way to avoid a catastrophic collapse is to change the unsustainable levels of population growth and consumption. The only other chance is the development of some unprecedented technology that we currently don't have. Both paths would need collective action on a global scale, prioritizing our planet over our economy. According to the authors of the report, the chance of that happening is very unlikely. For News with Rick Sanchez, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
And this is the News with Rick Sanchez. As you watch it, let me tell you what we've got coming your way after this break. We're going to have a weapons expert who's going to be joining us. He will tell us about explosions. That's what he knows, as all of us try and figure out what really caused this explosion in Beirut that the world is talking about and focusing on. Hey, welcome back. I'm Rick Sanchez. Today, world leaders are responding to the disastrous explosion at the port of Beirut earlier this week. Today, the president of France visited the site of the blast while bringing material aid to the nation, as well as the promise of more support. Other European nations, Italy, Germany, have promised to send aid as well. Closer to home, Israel has offered to take in Lebanese medical patients, and Iran has even offered their support as well. Russia, meanwhile, is sending in doctors and nurses to create a temporary field hospital. RT's Igor Zhdanov has the exclusive details.
This is a field hospital in its early stages. It is just being built. In fact, there's another group of emergency workers on the way with more infrastructure. But this is where Russian rescuers will be taking those injured, those still in need of medical attention from after the blast. Well, everything that you can see around me was erected overnight. It was literally an empty lot just at 2 o'clock in the morning last time I was here. Well, fast forward 6 odd hours and, well, there's already a small tent city here. Well, these search dogs have been traveling with me, or rather, I was with them. And they will be sniffing out those who may be still trapped and alive under the rubble. The city of Beirut is devastated, morally, physically, financially. In fact, of all places that I've ever been to, apart from active war zones, of course, this one, with all the rubble, destruction and vehicles just abandoned at the side of the road, resembles a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie the most. And the Russian aid effort aims here at relieving at least some of the pain. I'm Igor Zhdanov reporting from Beirut in Lebanon, RT.
All right, now let's take a step back to see the actual blast once again. Let me show you once again what this blast looked like. There it is. And it's a pretty wide shot, right? So you can kind of see, or as we discussed yesterday, where is this explosion emanating from? Is it coming from the ground? Is it coming from above? Everybody's been trying to work through this information. So joining us now is explosions expert Rene Basulto, joining us from Miami, Florida. Mr. Basulto, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. This is your expertise. Is there anything you see in the video or what you've read or any of the evidence or any of the reports that would lead you to believe that this is either a case of sabotage or something else, maybe a missile?
It's hard to tell if it's sabotage. It does not appear to be a missile. From what I've read and from the facts available to us right now, it seems to be an explosion of the ammonium nitrate that was being stored at a facility there. It's quite a bit of amount of ammonium nitrate.
So let me press you on that. Let's suppose somebody knew then that there was ammonium nitrate there. I would almost argue, as many experts have, an irresponsible amount of ammonium nitrate stored in one place for years. But somebody knows that and they say, I could blow this thing up pretty easily. All I got to do is take a match and boom, throw it into that ammonium nitrate and I can get something like that to happen. Is that a scenario that's possible that would include sabotage?
There are a lot of things that need to happen for an explosion like this to occur. A lot of things need to go wrong. It's not as simple as throwing a match at it. The ammonium nitrate itself is not a combustible amount. However, at high enough temperatures, the ammonium nitrate can become volatile and violently decompress on its own. So you would need a sustained source of of heat at a very high temperature, which in this case appears to have been the fire adjacent to it. You can see by the pictures, you can see in the video now, that there's a fire smoldering, a quite large fire next to this facility. And the sad part is that it was properly improperly being stored. It usually needs to be in a dry, cool, well-ventilated space. It's rare that you have that type of facility. It has to be a facility specifically for this type of chemical. And it was being stored there for a long time. The material itself starts to decompose and releases the nitric oxides, which in itself could be a very bad problem.
So you're an expert. You've looked at this situation. You've looked at the video, and the prima facie that you see in literally before your face is that there was an explosion. It affected the stored ammonium nitrate, and it caused the explosion. It makes us all think then that these reports we're hearing about missiles and sabotage, you're pretty much knocking those down right now, right? We're down to 30 seconds.
It doesn't appear to be a missile. Could it be sabotage? Possibly. Ammonium nitrate is very well known to be a very explosive device. It's used in mining operations as well as a fertilizer. But you would have to be significant amount of fire and know that that fire is going to spread to this building in order for it to be sabotage. You can't rule it out completely. The full investigation needs to be done, but
no, but listen, you do this for a living. You're called into courtrooms to be asked the questions I just called you. So I thank you for your expertise on this and for sharing it with us, Mr. Basulto, Rene Basulto. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now tomorrow morning at 8:30 in the morning, we're going to know how many jobs the United States added in July despite the COVID-19 surge that we're experiencing. Remember the June report was hailed as the beginning of the end of the economic meltdown. Why? Because, well, back then the unemployment rate went from 15% to like 11%. 5,000 Americans were hired back, mostly due to the lockdown ending in most states. So what's the expectation for tomorrow? Economists are saying somewhere around 1.7 more Americans will have gone back to work in July, which would mean this quick recovery, this V-shaped thing that a lot of people are hoping for, that may not be on the horizon, not if we're going from 5 million to 1.7, right? But let me bring in an expert. John Grace knows a lot more about this than I do. He directs Investors Advantage, and he's good enough to join us now. I know the numbers aren't in, but we're getting some pretty good indications of what might happen. First of all, let me just ask you that. John, what do you think the numbers are going to look like tomorrow morning at 8:30?
Well, I think they're going to look as good as they might. Probably won't be as depressing as we might imagine. We haven't seen the end here. Of course, this COVID thing is a disaster of epic proportions. But let's recognize when we look at the numbers, whatever they might be, Rick, they kind of are the average, which is a good way to look at them. But when we look at how these this COVID-19 is impacting for minorities and women. So we have to keep those things in mind as well. They're the front line in many respects.
We lost you for just a minute, John, but I think what you were alluding to is the fact that there's a certain part or a certain sector of an economy that is being hit harder than others, right? And this is where we get into that conversation you and I have had in the past, Wall Street versus Main Street, right?
Correct. I mean, for example, just to look at the state of Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, we all remember last year we were crowing about 4% unemployment. And there are two things here. One, we need to look at the quality of that employment, the quality of those jobs, the quality of those incomes. And then in the state of Illinois, when nationally, I think we were at 4% unemployment, best number we've seen in about 50 years. In the state of Illinois, the number for Black folks is more like 10%. So, that's graphically different, 4% to 10%. 10%, if that were national, we would not be doing backflips.
There's a lot of people out there watching us right now, and they're thinking, well, what is the unemployment or employment picture? And everything I've read in the last 24 hours preceding or preparing for this interview with you led me to believe that the real problem experts are seeing is long-term employment, that the days of people getting a job that they're going to keep for a long time may be over.
Well, they've been over for quite some time. They're over in Japan and they're over here. And that's what I'm saying. Let's not just look at, a 4% increase to income. If your income's $1 million, 4% is meaningful. If your income's $30,000 or $40,000, $50, $60 a month, that's not very meaningful in these United States of America. So if we're talking about the enjoyment of the boats rising on the sea, those boats need to rise for everybody as opposed to those without a paddle or those who are sitting on the sidelines who can't even get in the water.
John Grace, my thanks to you, sir, for joining us and taking us through. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll be reporting on those numbers when they come out at 8:30 in the morning. We'll have the figures here, and we'll try and analyze them for you as well. Stay safe, stay connected. Check into portable TV if you get a chance, so you can watch us and keep us in your back pocket, as I like to say, on your cell phone. In the meantime, we'll be looking forward to seeing you again here on The News with Rick Sanchez, where, as we say, it's always time to do news again.